Hello and welcome to the analysis of 11th game of FIDE World Chess Championship match between the reigning world champion Ding Liren from China and Tomraju Gukesh from India. After the first 10 games, both the players have 5 points. This is a 14-game match. Any player who gets 7.5 points becomes the world champion. Since we have only 4 games left, all the games are expected to be very tense, and we have had 7 consecutive draws from round 4 to round 7, round 10. All the games have been drawn. All the games have been fighting draws where both the players tried their best to win, except the round 10. The previous round was a very safe and unexciting draw, and I had already predicted that the last 4 games would flare up. The fight between both the players are going to be very intense, and the round 10 draw was just a lull before storm. So let us check whether my prediction was correct. Here, Gukesh started with white pieces. He played knight f3, and after d5, Gukesh plays a minor surprise, that is c4. Previously in the same match, he had played g3, but now, and also he had played d4. So we have had Queen's Gambit, we have had King's Indian attack, or later it transposed to Catalan, and finally we have this move, which is the Reti opening. Well, Reti opening is named after the chess philosopher Richard Reti. And the main philosophy behind c4 is that white withholds his central pawns for some time, waiting for black to define the pawn structure before advancing his pawns. Secondly, white is also indirectly attacking the center with his flank pawns. Previously, the classical chess theorists, they used to emphasize that we should always control the center with our pawns. We should play e4, d4. But then came the chess players like Richard Reti, Aaron Nimzowitsch, who encouraged the players who developed different system of chess altogether. So c4 belongs to the hyper-modern school of chess. Well, here black played the most principled move, that is d4. And this is not only principled, it's very logical to think that since white doesn't occupy the center, black takes and advances in the center. Now, having said that, there was an argument in favor of playing a simple move e6, given that Ding Liren has been exceptionally cautious in this World Championship match, and he was playing with a draw even with white pieces. E6 would have been a move which is probably more suitable for Ding Liren's psychology. But yeah, he played d4. He accepted the challenge for a sharp game, which we shall witness now. Well, white played the move b4, which begs explanation. What is white doing? Instead of bringing out his pieces, he advances another flank pawn. Well, the most normal move here would be to play g3 with the idea of putting the bishop on a long diagonal. And I should say this move was played previously in World Championship encounters quite a few times. And the most notable or memorable time this move was played was in a match between the legendary world champion Anatoly Karpov and his arch rival Viktor Korchnoi. In 1978, when this move was played, the match was very tense, as it is today. Both the players had won 5 games each, and the regulations was that anybody winning 6th game would be the world champion. Draws would not be counted. In that tense situation, g3 was played, and Karpov, with black side, managed to defeat Korchnoi. He occupied the center with knight c6, e4, and gradually he outplayed Korchnoi. So Karpov remained world champion in 1978. But this move was not played by Ding. Instead, Gukesh went for b4. The idea is that white is trying typically to play around black's center. He would play a move like bishop b2, pressurizing or attacking, hitting this pawn. And black would not be able to play knight c6 because white always has the move b5. So basically the move b4 discourages knight c6, and also the move c5 can be met by bc. So black will not be able to easily reinforce the center. That is white's idea when he plays b4. Advancing the flank pawns but indirectly controlling the center. Now here black played the move c5 anyways. So black doesn't care about white's idea. He simply played c5 to support his pawns. Well, the idea behind c5 is that if white plays bc, now black will develop knight c6 without fearing b5, since white's pawn is already on c5. And then black would occupy the center with e5 and take back the pawn on c5. So it's a temporary pawn sacrifice, but with c5, black basically strengthens his center. Another move which I would like to mention here is a very odd looking move, f6. This was not played by black, but this is played by many strong players, and it has been played by even the previous world champion and chess legend from India, Vishwanathan Anand. The idea is obviously why black wants to play e5, but it looks very odd because the pawn takes the f6 square away from black's own knight. But I will demonstrate one idea when black plays f6. So basically in chess, in most moves, in order to get something, in order to get a big center, we have to compromise. For instance, in this position, black has compromised the f6 square for his knight. And if white plays e3, challenging the center, if he attacks the pawn, of course, black can defend. And now black is attacking the b4 pawn as well. He has an absolutely good position. So if white plays e3, black can go e5. And upon ed, black has a surprising move e4, attacking the knight instead of taking back the pawn at once. Black's idea is, instead of capturing this with pawn, he would rather capture this with one of the pieces and utilize the d4 and d3 square for the pieces. Here, usually white plays queen e2, pinning the pawn and attacking the pawn, and black plays queen e7, supporting the pawn and unpinning the pawn. After knight g1, since the knight doesn't have a good retreat square, knight g1, knight h5, h4, black can go g5, the knight is trapped. And if the knight goes to g1, black has a very nice move, that is knight c6. This way, black will recover the pawn because the knight is attacking both b4 and d4. And not only will black recover the pawn, but wherever the knight lands, either here or here, the knight will have a great square and black will have the advantage. So this is another idea, f6. Of course, white has different ways to play. The move f6 especially weakens this diagonal. So if white manages to put his bishop here, he may even have advantage. But that is a very interesting theory. Ding goes for something which is more solid and easier to handle, that is c5. Here white played e3, and we are heading for a very interesting game. Well, the move e3 signals that white is willing to sacrifice a pawn to play for attack. Now here black can actually capture the c4 pawn, the b4 pawn, first by exchanging and taking this. Well, black cannot capture this pawn immediately because white can in that case capture the d4 pawn. But that is why black can, if black wants to get capture the b4 pawn, first he has to exchange and then take cb4. So why does Gukesh sacrifice a pawn? Because by giving away this pawn, white will have absolute control over the center. He has pawn clusters, and more importantly, after moves like, say, bishop d3, the subsequent moves, and castling, his rook will be placed on f file. The f file has been opened, and white's rook will be very active. White will have very good center, and that is the reason behind sacrifice of this pawn. Even the pawn can start moving up, creating attacking chances. So this was white's idea, and this is a common theme in these type of positions. So I don't think it surprised Ding. But then at this point, Ding went for a long thought. Already in fifth move, he took 38.5 minutes to play knight f6. It's a very simple move, very obvious move. So it's anybody's guess what Ding was thinking over here. Probably he was recalling some variations or recalling moves. But 40 moves on fifth move, rather it's fourth move, is too much time to consume. And both the players have 2 hours to make first 40 moves. But already by fourth move, he has consumed 40 minutes. And in the fifth move, after a3, he once again took 20 minutes. So Ding consumed 1 hour or half the time in only 5 moves. And these moves are not so difficult to find. Knight f6 is a very common move. And let me explain you, this is interestingly a position which arises from another opening, which I would like to show just now. Going back to the initial position, if white starts with d4 and black plays knight f3, if white goes c4, e6 and knight f3, everything is standard stuff, and black goes c5. This is a Benoni when white advances the pawn. And now if black plays b5, this is a relatively rare move, but an interesting move. This move is called the Blumenfeld Gambit. And here, black basically offers a pawn. White can capture the pawn the same manner which I mentioned just now, and white can occupy the center and create counterattack for this pawn. Well, what white played was exactly the opposite. We have exactly the same position, but if we imagine black is white and white is black, it's just a mirror of the same position, we will arrive in the same position which has arisen from Gukesh and Ding game. The difference is that now Gukesh has white pieces. In Blumenfeld Gambit, if it is white to play, or the player with the gambitier has to make the move, that is the difference. Here, white played a3. He did not utilize his extra move for attack. Rather, he played a simple move a3, supporting the b-pawn. Well, the moves he could have tried are b5, bc, or even ed, cd, bishop b2, putting pressure upon this pawn. Here, probably black would have to go bishop g4 to pin the knight and defend the pawn, but that is how white should have played. But here, white did not make use of his extra move, and he played a small little move a3, supporting the b pawn. So I would suggest this was a slightly timid reaction from Gukesh, having played a blockbuster opening, a surprising opening, an attacking opening. Suddenly the move a3 doesn't quite fit into the spirit of Reti opening. And black played bishop g4, again taking 20 minutes. So he had consumed 1 hour. White had a distinct time advantage at this point. White played ed, cd, and now he played h3, chasing away the bishop. If the bishop goes back, then probably white was aiming to play something like bishop b2, attacking this, or first d3 and bishop b2. The d4 pawn may be surrounded. So black had to exchange his bishop for a knight. And now we have a very, very interesting imbalance. White has the extra c pawn, which gives him a queenside majority, and black has the extra e pawn, which gives him central majority. Apart from that, white has a light square bishop, which black does not have. Instead, black has the knight. Black has an extra knight. So here, white should emphasize, or white should prove, that his extra c pawn is more valuable than black's extra e pawn, and white's bishop is better than the knight. And black will try to prove the other way around. The knight is better than bishop, and e5 or e pawn is more useful than c pawn. So let's see who succeeds in proving his point. Black played queen c7, defending b7, and white played d3, while opening the diagonal for the bishop. Black played a5. It is around here that black played very nice series of moves. He played a5, attacking the b pawn. See, the pawn on a3 is pinned. The rook would capture the rook on a1. If, for example, white plays a neutral move like g3, black can simply capture the pawn. That is why white has to react. Whether white plays ba or b5, in either cases, the c5 square can be occupied by black's pieces. So till white has a pawn structure like this, he controls all the 4 squares on the queen side with his pawns. Black's pieces cannot come up to this point. But after a5, b5 by white, certainly the c5 square has gone into black's hand. And black immediately plays knight d7 to occupy this square with his piece. Once black places his knight here, white will be unable to dislodge the knight with his pawns. So that is a very nice theme. a5, b5, knight d7. White in this position has realized that his opening experiment has not succeeded. And actually, although black has taken a lot of time thinking, but black has got an excellent position for his knight. Now, this knight is probably better than this bishop. Once it reaches c5, it's definitely better. And white's c pawn, instead of advancing, is now left behind. So it will be solidly blocked, and in future, the e pawn may be more important than c pawn. So both the imbalances have gone in black's favor instead of white's. Here, white played g3. But the concern was, during the game, many of Gukesh's fans were concerned because Gukesh took almost 1 hour or more than 1 hour to play such a simple move. Probably he was trying to find the right plan to counter black's knight c5, but the position is already advantageous to black. White went bishop g2, developing his piece, and now black played a very nice and interesting follow-up to the previous moves. He identified the square or the pawn on d3 to be a weakness. Well, a pawn is weak when it cannot be supported by his neighboring pawns. So since white doesn't have a pawn on c2 or e2, the d3 pawn is left behind. It's fixed, and it has to be defended by pieces only. So before developing, black decided to increase pressure upon white's weakness. He went knight fd7, and white continued with his development, and black played knight e5, double attacking, threatening the queen, threatening this pawn. Now, with both the knights, black will capture this pawn, and the entire white's position is likely to collapse. White played queen f4. It's the only move, pinning this knight, because if black captures, white can capture the queen. And if he captures with this knight, white can take this pawn. So queen f4 is the only move. Black decided to defend his own pawn, and white also decided to defend his own pawn. Here, If black captures this with the C knight, white will utilize the pin and he will take back the knight with his rook. And if black is smart enough, before capturing this, he can't capture this at once, but before capturing this, if he tries to displace the queen, and only when the queen goes somewhere capture the rook, the queen would rather go to e4, and by this means white will take both black's knights for his rook. So this is definitely good for white. Okay, so after rook d1, black could not capture this immediately. He went for a move which is already a slight inaccuracy. He went for g6. And there were at least two moves which were simpler and better than the move g6. Well, he could have simply played e6 with the idea of unpinning this knight on e5 and then capturing this pawn. Well, that would have given black a clearly advantageous position. So after e6, just remember that when black will have his bishop on d6, white can actually take d4 pawn because the rook will not be supporting the pawn. But then whenever white captures d4, black will have the knight fought by playing knight b3, attacking the queen and the rook. So that would be clearly better for black. Another move was f6, supporting this knight and threatening a move like, say, g5, and g5 moving the queen away and then capturing the pawn because this knight will not be pinned anymore. And if white goes for some move like, say, h4, preventing g5, then black can once again go back to e6 plans. Having weakened the king side further, he now goes back to the original idea of bishop d6 and capturing this pawn. So what we have learned so far is, well, while developing, we should look at the opponent's weaknesses also and develop our pieces accordingly. So look at the way how black deployed his pieces. Okay, after g6, which is an inaccuracy and allowed Gukesh to come back in the game, white played a4, trying to desperately go for bishop a3 and remove this great knight on c5. Well, in certain positions, knights are better than bishops if the knights have outposts or supported squares, and if the knights cannot be dislodged from those outposts. Here black played h5, a nice move with the idea of bishop h6, displacing the queen from this f4 square. White played b6. This is a fantastic resource by white. White desperately wants to play something to take away the initiative from black. So black was threatening bishop h6, and when the queen moves, captured the pawn. White played b6, attacking the queen. Now, what would be white's best move here? You may pause the video and guess what you would play if you are black. Well, obviously the move queen b6 is out of question because black would lose the knight on e5. The queen is tied to defense of the knight. The only two moves he has are queen d6 and queen b8. Well, the move queen b8 is actually the best move, where the queen cannot be further harassed, and it moves out of, well, it's on a supported square, supported by the rook, and now black will be threatening the d3 pawn. So this is clearly better for black if he goes queen b8. But instead, Ding made a mistake. He made a minor inaccuracy. He went for queen d6. That allowed Gukesh to play bishop a3. Now the queen is under small attack by the bishop. I mean, this knight is pinned. Previously, the knight on e5 was pinned. Now the knight on c5 is pinned thanks to the move queen d6. Black played bishop h6 according to his plan, and white queen, well, has to go to an important square, e4. He chose to go to e4, but only after exchanging the knight. He can't go queen e4 at once. And now white went queen e4. The queen and the bishop combines to attack the b7 pawn. This pawn on b6 is still under attack, but white is counterattacking the b7. black went knight c6. So already we have an opposite color bishop, which may be drawish if the game enters endgame. But before that, both the players have to navigate the intricacies of middle game. Here white played knight a3, a very nice way of developing his knight, because the knight is now planning to go to b5, c7, or simply fall back to c2, protecting the b4 square. Well, here in this position, the b4 square is a weakness which black can utilize in future. Okay, black played rook d7. He strengthens his position. He is overprotecting b7 so that later, well, he can either go knight b4 without fearing queen b7, or he can actually capture on b6. Well, instead of this, he could have actually taken this pawn directly. That would allow white to take the b file. White is a pawn down, but as we have seen, that Gukesh was offering pawn right from the opening. So Gukesh is not afraid to sacrifice pawns. Here he would play rook b1, and if black goes queen c7, the rook would enter into white's position, into black's position, with the intention of doubling and putting pressure upon b7 pawn. So white definitely has very good game in return for a pawn. He can also go c5 with the intention of, after rook b1, after queen c7, white would play rook b5. He could also play b5, c5 with the intention of playing knight to c4 and occupying all the weak squares. Okay, so in the game, black played rook d7, overprotecting b7, and white played knight c2. The knight fell back to c2 to prevent black from going knight b4 and covering the b file. So here, black continued with queen b6. He took the pawn. Now that the b pawn is overprotected, black takes up the challenge. White played rook b1 and black queen went back. White went rook b5. Everything according to plan. Black went castles. Okay, so finally at move 24, black managed to castle and bring the other rook in play. Well, this is an important position where white could have played rook b1, which is the most obvious move, putting pressure upon the b7 pawn and activating his rook. If black defends the pawn, white would have to play, well, he would typically open this diagonal to continue his attack. One of the best moves in this position is to go back queen e1 with the idea of, well, capturing the knight and taking back this pawn or moving rook b6. If black plays b6, protecting the a5 pawn as well as b7 pawn, white has the idea or the trick c5, piling up pressure upon the b pawn. And if black plays bc5, white would capture the c6 knight first, the defender of b8, and then he would capture the b8 rook. Black cannot capture this because white can either take back with a pawn supporting his bishop, or he can simply take back with a bishop. White will be a piece up. So that would have been a very good idea for white. Simply playing rook bd1, white would have a clear advantage, especially after the move queen e1. Instead, white played knight e1. He went for a lengthy maneuver, knight b3, knight c5, which is good, but if black is careful, white can still throw away his advantage. Now, black played a small inaccuracy once again. He should have played rook t6 with the intention of playing b6. Well, overprotecting the c6 knight and intending to shift his rook to e6 or f6 according to white's reply, and then relieving his pressure. Basically, to activate the rook on d7, rook d6 was the best move. Instead, he decided to defend the b7 pawn with a passive move, rook b8. And white played knight b3, threatening to go to c5. Now the move b6 is not possible because the c6 knight is hanging. Well, here white played e6 so that the rook can hide behind the pawn. Well, this is a very passive defense by black, placing his rook on b8, placing the other rook on e7. Well, it should be mentioned that both the players are under tremendous time pressure. Ding had to make the remaining moves, that means 13 moves, in less than 7 minutes. So because he had consumed time in the opening phases trying to take decision, his time management was extremely poor. He was moving quite fast now, and at a time where he had critical positions, he had to find the best moves. He didn't have time to find the best moves. White played rook bd1. Now white is piling up pressure against b7. His idea is to take rook b7. Now the only move for black was to block the file by playing knight b4. And after this move, white still has a small advantage. He can take back this pawn with his rook, but black is very much in the game. Instead, black played what is the biggest blunder of the match so far, the biggest mistake we have seen the entire match so far. He moved his queen to the worst square, queen to c8. Running short of time, he played queen c8, allowing white to play the knockout punch, that is queen takes c6. Queen sacrifice and win immediately. If black takes back with the queen, white would capture the queen and black is unable to recapture because the rook is hanging. If black takes with the pawn, white would capture the rook and now take back the queen because the queen is pinned. It cannot escape. And whether black captures the rook or supports the queen, in either case, white would be left with an extra piece. So after the move queen c6, Ding, being the world champion, trusted that his opponent can win the game with an extra piece without any fight. He decided to resign. So in this position, 28th move, suddenly the move queen c8 was a big blunder, and after queen c6, immediately the game ended. What can I say about this game? Gukesh has taken the lead with 3 games remaining. He is 1 point ahead of Ding, and Ding has to make a comeback immediately. It's now or never for Ding. And can Gukesh become the first world champion after Vishy Anand from India? Can Gukesh become the youngest ever world champion at the age of 18? There are lots of questions to answer. But for one thing, my prediction that the last 4 games would be very exciting and the 10th game draw was just a lull before storm. My prediction has come true. And another very interesting point to note from this game is, although the pendulum swung from one end to other, once Ding was winning, sometimes Gukesh was having advantage, but ultimately, the player who showed more courage, it's Gukesh who initiated the complications, and he has been doing so in all the games. The player who shows courage, ultimately he reaps the dividend. That is the moral from this game. Gukesh goes 1 up, and we shall be meeting again for the next game of World Chess Championship. Stay tuned.